Why does Invincible feel closer to Japanese manga and anime than to traditional Western superhero stories? It's got nothing to do with the art style, or the ridiculous deadlines animators have to deal with. Both the comic and the Prime Video show share 4 key similarities with manga. The first one is the story structure. Most superhero comics take place in a shared universe. They're meant to last literally forever, taking advantage of the popularity of already established characters, like Spider-Man or Batman. From a business standpoint, it makes total sense. It's easier to keep publishing Spider-Man stories forever than to come up with new characters every 5 years. But to make that work, editors don't allow the characters to age, or go through major changes. That's why all your favorite superheroes are frozen at around 30 years old. From that point on, they never get any older, even if they don't have powers that explain it, like Superman or Wolverine do. If you want to see them getting old, you have to look for stories outside the main continuity, like Kingdom Come or The Dark Knight Returns. Stan Lee explained this better than anyone else, with a technique he called the illusion of change. The idea is to make it look like big things are happening to the heroes, but in the end, they go back to the same old status quo, so the series can keep going forever. We can blame good old Stan for not getting to see Peter married with kids in the main continuity. The character is forced to go back to his usual status quo, his safe point, where he's broke and has relationship problems. But Invincible doesn't work like that. It uses the same kind of storytelling you find in manga, especially neketsu, or battle manga. In this genre, the story always moves forward and keeps progressing. It never goes back to square one. Let's take Naruto as an example, which was published for 15 years, just like Invincible. In the first chapters, we see an annoying little kid who wants people to notice him because he feels lonely, and he dreams of becoming Hokage. But by the end of the manga, Naruto grows up, becomes a bit more serious, takes on responsibility, achieves his dream of becoming Hokage, gets married, and has a kid. Even though he's still living in Konoha, the story and characters don't reset. If this were a Marvel or DC story, Naruto would have gone through a dimensional vortex during the battle with Kaguya and gone back to being a kid, so the story could start all over again. Invincible has a similar structure. Throughout the story, Mark grows as a person. His personality changes, and he also ages, even if he does it more slowly than normal because of his Viltrumite genes. The setting in which his adventures take place also changes halfway through the comic, which is unusual for a traditional superhero story. If Invincible followed Stan Lee's formula, every season would constantly go back to the same status quo as the early episodes. Omni-Man would be Earth's most important hero again, Mark would be single, and Rex and Adam Eve would still be in the teen team. In an interview for Invincible's 20th anniversary, Kirkman explained why he made that choice. "I wanted Invincible to be just like every other superhero book and have a different creative team that takes over. I was really excited about the idea of being able to read the book as a fan. And then as I got older, I started thinking, no, Invincible plays against type, and it'd be cool if, unlike every other superhero book, this was a story that had a beginning, middle, and an end." The idea of having a clear ending and not resetting the story comes from manga, not superhero comics. And yeah, I know most mangaka don't have an ending plan from the start because editors want the story to go on as long as possible, as long as it keeps selling. The best example of that is Death Note. The creators said they thought about ending the manga after the final confrontation with L, but they kept going because apparently they had to.
I did not know that.
But since those stories don't go on forever, they can have a proper ending. That lets characters grow and change over the years, something that never happens in Marvel or DC. For example, Eren isn't the same after the time skip. Same thing happens with Itadori after Shibuya. At the beginning of the manga, he's a naive and optimistic guy, but by the end he's stoic. A change like that would never be possible in a superhero comic. Even if some writer dared to change a hero's personality, they'd be forced to bring the character back to their usual status quo by the end of the series. But Mark and all the side characters can change as the story moves forward, just like in manga. I'm not just talking about Rex's redemption, but the massive shift Nolan goes through. From being an alien conqueror to a sort of anti-hero, and then an... I better stop or I'll spoil the whole story for you. Since characters don't come back from the dead just to repeat the same cycle, deaths in Invincible feel way heavier. In 2023, Marvel killed off Miss Marvel, but nobody cried over Kamala Khan's death because we all knew she was coming back. And she did. The whole thing was just an excuse to make her a mutant. But Rex's death is heartbreaking because we know there's no way he's coming back. We cry just like we did when Ace or Jiraiya died. We're never gonna see those characters again. To be fair, Kirkman made us think Angstrom and Conquest were dead, and they ended up surviving. This is pretty much what happens in Marvel and DC. But when he really wants to kill someone off, he can do it. The second similarity between Invincible and manga is the fights, and how they impact the story. In American comics, we usually get really well-drawn fights, but the battles rarely take up a whole issue. Since every issue needs to have a beginning, middle, and end, the big fight with the villain usually only lasts a couple of pages. This has been changing over the decades because back in the Golden Age, a fight could be over in just 2 panels. Nowadays, stories are a bit more decompressed, since publishers want to collect 4 to 6 issues to sell a full trade paperback. But even so, the final battle with Null and King in Black doesn't even get 15 pages. And we're talking about a fight that's considered super long by Western comic standards. But since Invincible is an independent superhero, the series could have really long fights that went on for several issues, just like in manga. Since the manga format is different, and creators can end chapters whenever they want, some entire volumes focus on just one fight. I know a manga chapter is usually shorter than a single American issue, but the fight between Ippo and Alfredo lasted 38 chapters. That's roughly 680 pages.
Wow.
Of course, Kirkman didn't go all in with fights, as long as in Hajime no Ippo, or One Piece. To do that, Invincible would have had to run for more than 600 issues, which is impossible for a monthly series. But the first fight with Conquest lasts 4 whole issues. That's around 88 pages. And later on, there's an epic fight that goes on for several days. We hadn't seen something like that in superhero comics since the death of Superman. But even that wasn't the same, because that battle kept getting interrupted. There were breaks, and different characters showed up. The focus Invincible puts on fights, and the brutal way they're portrayed feels a lot like Dragon Ball. And it's not just the types of punches, or the destruction in the battles. A key feature of Neketsu is showing how characters train to get stronger. That never happens in American comics. At most, we might see Spider-Man learning to use his powers in his first appearance, but after that, he's instantly a master at using his abilities. Every now and then, a writer throws in a power-up mid-fight, like Donny Cates giving Venom cosmic powers. But in general, superheroes always have the same power level, and don't need to get stronger. The story never focuses on effort, or whether they deserve to win based on their physical skills. That's not the case in Invincible, which follows the Neketsu formula. In this type of manga, the main character has to learn how to control a special ability, gets pretty good at it, faces a strong enemy, and beats them. But right after that, a new, even stronger enemy shows up, and the hero has to train again to surpass their limits and beat him. Then a third enemy appears, and the whole cycle repeats until the manga ends. Said like that, it might sound super repetitive, but this formula is perfect for showing how the protagonist grows. It lets the writers raise the danger level constantly, bringing in more and more powerful enemies. It also reflects Japan's culture of hard work, persistence, and earning your victories. Maybe Viltrumites don't unlock new transformations like Goku, but Kirkman used the exact same formula. Mark gets his powers, his dad trains him to get stronger, and he gets his face smashed in multiple times. He trains to get even stronger, and beats a Viltrumite in battle for the first time, but then Anissa shows up, and she's stronger than him. Mark trains again in season 3, and now he can beat all his enemies. In theory, he should be able to face Anissa one-on-one, but then Conquest appears, and Mark can't beat him without help. I don't have to tell you how the story is going to keep going. And now that I think about it, there are characters that have Dragon Ball style transformations. Alan literally changes form and gets bigger and stronger when he's about to die.
Looks very, similar.
The third similarity between Invincible and manga is that it's a creator-driven project. This story had just one writer and only 2 artists across 144 issues. Kirkman wasn't playing in someone else's sandbox. He was building his own. Thanks to his partnership with Image Comics, he had the freedom to do basically whatever the story needed. He could kill off whichever characters he wanted, however and whenever he wanted, without asking the boss for permission. He could have a couple have kids, or send a character away from Earth forever. That kind of creative control is similar to how manga is made. In Japan, most manga series are made by a single author or a writer-artist team, like Oba and Obata. Mangaka have editors, of course, but they're usually there to help shape the creator's vision, not to enforce some big IP management strategy. Sometimes, that leads to legendary levels of freedom. Katsuhiro Otomo could both write the Akira manga and direct its film adaptation, essentially as an auteur. The same thing happened with Kirkman, who wrote the Invincible comic, is an executive producer on the show, and has the final say on what happens with the whole franchise in every medium. If he doesn't approve the next AAA video game, then that game won't be released.
Started this company.
This approach is totally different from how traditional superhero comics work, where dozens of writers have handled the same character over the years. Batman has been written by tons of different people since 1939. Each one might add something new, but none of them has full control over the character's story or fate. That causes contradictions in the canon, and slightly different versions of the same character, depending on who's writing them. Like I said earlier, no one can make major changes because of the illusion of change. But John Byrne's Superman executed a version of Zod, something Jeff Johns' Superman would never do. These writers also have to answer to corporate editors and the business needs of Marvel or DC. Maybe Matt Reeves wanted to use Clayface as the villain in The Batman 2, but now he can't, because James Gunn already announced a solo movie for the character. Same thing happens in the MCU, where the final decision doesn't belong to the writers or directors, but to Kevin Feige. Just to be clear, I'm not complaining about that. It makes sense that producers and execs want to protect their brand, but we're never going to see traditional superhero projects that truly feel auteur-made. They'll always be playing in someone else's sandbox. And this doesn't just affect the kinds of stories we get, or how the characters behave. It also changes how fans relate to their favorite heroes. Every comic book or superhero movie fan has their own favorite version of Superman or Batman. Some love the grounded, gritty Batman from Frank Miller. Others prefer the more adventurous and fantastical Batman from Neil Adams. We see the same thing in live action, with Spider-Man fans arguing over which Spidey is the best. I talked about this when I explained why it's impossible to make a live-action Venom that makes everyone happy. Some people want him to be Spider-Man's villain, others want him to be an anti-hero. Some want Eddie Brock to be the host, others want Flash Thompson, and others go for Matt Gargan. But none of that happens with manga. And it doesn't happen with Invincible either. Sure, Hunter x Hunter fans might debate over whether they like Skinny Gon or Giga Chad Gon more, but there are no fights over who writes the character better. Yoshihiro Togashi is the only one who's ever written Gon, and both anime adaptations are pretty faithful to the original material, so everyone's on the same page. It's the same case with Invincible, where nobody questions Kirkman's ability to write these characters. And even though the original creator doesn't write or direct every episode of the show, he is in charge of the whole project. The animated series team deserves credit, but the real mastermind behind it all is Kirkman. And now we've got the fourth similarity, the way the adaptation is done. Marvel and DC adaptations usually drift pretty far from the source material, taking just the core ideas from the comics to tell a brand new story. Infinity War and Endgame clearly take inspiration from Jim Starlin's Infinity Gauntlet, like Thanos being the main villain and blipping half the universe away. But his motivations are totally different. In the comic, Thanos isn't trying to bring balance to anything, he just wants to impress death. Adam Warlock plays a huge role in the comic, and he doesn't even show up in the movie. And in the comic, it's Nebula who steals the gauntlet and defeats Thanos. This is because comic book writers have zero influence on the adaptations, and it's more important to surprise the audience and keep a connected universe than to stay faithful to the original. Plus, since there are so many different versions of every character and team, the studio has to pick and choose. Man of Steel by Byrne, Birthright by Wade, For All Seasons by Loeb, and Secret Origin by Johns are all excellent Superman origin stories, but they're incompatible. So instead of adapting just one of them, the movies usually mix a bunch of them together. This gives you something inspired by the comics, but not actually the same. But that doesn't happen in Invincible, and it doesn't happen in anime either. Invincible is one of the most faithful adaptations out there. Not only did they keep each character's personality, powers, and key story events, a lot of the dialogue is copied word for word, and entire scenes are lifted straight from the comic. The changes they made are minimal, and they're all there to improve the story. The fight with Hooded Mark and Omni Mark is way longer in the show, and we actually see them hurt Eve. In the comic, she just appears with a broken leg out of nowhere. Rex's redemption and sacrifice are handled better too. Even Powerplex has more development. They show us the Battle of Chicago from his perspective, so we can understand his pain. We also see him trying to convince the district attorney to investigate Invincible. That wasn't included in the comic because there wasn't enough time.
You can't keep getting away with it!
Invincible feels like a manga adaptation, with how faithful it stays to the original. Just like the 90s version of Berserk, Monster, JoJo's, Attack on Titan, or Demon Slayer. These are all perfect examples of adaptations that are almost exact copies of the manga. Like in Invincible, these shows usually try to improve on the original material instead of changing everything. In the final chapter of Attack on Titan, Armin pretty much agrees with Eren's methods, which goes against everything his character had been built up to believe. But in the anime, Armin points out how wrong Eren was. Isayama listened to fans' complaints about the manga's ending, and made some changes in the anime so people wouldn't go after him. Kirkman did the same. He cut out a few tasteless jokes that were trendy back in the 2000s, but would definitely get him cancelled today. Like the part where Eve, after unlocking her powers during the conquest fight, altered her body to make her boobs bigger. That pervy moment got cut from the show, but even though Invincible is a great adaptation, it's a shame it didn't get Demon Slayer level animation. That would have taken the show to a whole other level. But to be fair, it was impossible for Invincible to look like that. We explain why in this video over here.
You can't keep getting away with it!